Good
That
morning.
means good morning. All right, I should start. There's just
I
there's a lot of me waving. You were looking
I
elsewhere.
didn't I
I don't
wasn't
know. I
looking.
have it as a convention that you're the one saying good morning first. I don't know why. I should
I
say good
didn't
morning.
know that you'd started because I was reaching over
How
and not
many
looking at the
hours do
screen.
we stay amateurs? Like, can we be amateurs even if we do this for 10,000 hours?
Of course we can, but that doesn't it's not amateur, it's real, it's authentic, it's lived experience. Welcome to season 2, episode 15 of Teaching Tangents. Another Sunday, although slightly later than planned, and we're both wearing red. You've got red on you,
Yes, I do have red.
although
I don't
different
have anything
t-shirt.
else to say about that. Well, yeah, it's all stuff I showed you before, so
We
this
stopped
is
the
my
t-shirts
communist
thing.
party. We did. I don't have any more new. I don't have any new T-shirts yet.
Fair enough.
And my mugs, we left that one like a long time ago already.
Yeah, that's because the questions got too interesting. Should we get into the question?
Yeah, let's get into the question. I think this is why people watch, really, rather than the T-shirts.
The
I like
question.
the T-shirts, but
So, so here's today's question, season 2, episode 15. How do you prepare for an internship interview in the US?
in the US,
Yeah,
okay, sure.
because I think that, I mean, for me, I read this question and I thought of differences between the US and the UK. My experience doing a year-long, I suppose it is an internship. I did 2 years at uni, then I worked for a year as part of my degree. Then I did my final year. I count, to me, that was called a placement year. It's a bit like an internship. There's lots of conversations at my school about internships, but there's very little conversation about either preparing for it or making the most of it. So I think
Well,
this
I
might be
mean,
a good
this is
way of
usually the kind
exploring
of
it.
yeah, no, exactly, and just so people know, I actually asked you to look into that topic, whether you had questions around the topic of internships, because my students are doing internships. Um, well, a bunch of them, yes. I mean, and that's the school where I'm teaching. Just to be clear, the school where I'm teaching is a small private school that delivers degrees after A levels or after baccalaureate. And this type of business schools is particularly known for having a lot of opportunities for internships and being very practical to learn stuff that is going to be useful on the job or in the industry. In this case, communications industry.
How would you define an internship? Because I think we might be, I don't know if we're speaking about different things.
We might be, actually. We should talk about that too.
Yeah.
And well, actually, I'll get into that. We'll get back to the question in a second. But what I mean by an internship, and France has a very specific way to define it.
Oh, okay.
Well, in France, there's legal ramifications because of working laws, employment
Okay.
laws. So you need to be paid. And there's just a rate which is lower than minimum wage and very affordable or super cheap for the employers. And it lasts a given amount of time. It can be free if it's under. So I don't know the details, so don't quote me on any of what I'm saying, right? But I know that there are 2-week-long internships in high school, and those are typically like you don't get paid for that, but you can.
Yep.
And so I think where you don't get paid is under a certain amount and under a certain age that you are. I think something along those lines.
You mean like when you say amount, number of
I mean, if
hours,
if it's less than a month,
I
and
see.
you only do so many hours a week.
Yep.
And it's in I think there's something along those lines, but I'm not certain. But if it's going to be more than a month, and then you need to get paid, you need to have paperwork. So a contract signed, obviously. What's called an internship report. So it's an agreement between the educational institution, so the school, and the employer and the student, or they don't necessarily, but in the case of what I'm talking about with my students anyway. So there's a report. So the employers contacted the school. There's a person that's responsible, and usually it's the student that takes care of like ferrying the paperwork across from both parties. But the school has, names of the person who's going to be responsible for the internship.
Wow.
Technically, the employer commits to looking after and training the person they have as an intern.
And this is like the French system. This isn't just the specific. This isn't a school thing.
No,
this is like
this
universal.
is in France.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Now, of course, I mean, I'm just describing some, and again, no, don't quote me on that because I've not looked into the legalese of this recently.
Yeah.
I'm just in like satellite because I'm seeing some of the stuff that my students are going to be reporting back to me, but I'm not taking care of any of the paperwork or the admin or anything like it. And of course, I'm describing things on paper, which life rarely happens in theory.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Okay. So,
but internships exist as a thing.
And then at the end of it,
it's very clearly defined.
Yes, absolutely. And at the end of it, the students, so the students in question, or the first years of a master's degree or fourth year studies after the baccalaureate or A levels, need to write a report, and which was they had to deliver it actually on the 6th. And as part of their verbal final exams of the year, which I'm the reviewer, we have to talk about their internships. It's part of the exam. So they deliver their memoir, which is a research piece throughout the year. I'm going to ask them questions about that. We're going to talk about it. They're going to present their personal work, which is on their topic of choice, which needs to be, actually, this is just another topic, so it doesn't matter. And then their internship report. So we'll talk about their experience, what worked, what didn't work, what they learned, didn't learn, what they expected, and what are they thinking for their careers, etc. And next year, so for all the students that are this class in particular that are going into the last year studies, which is the 5th year, and the 5th year is with this school again. It's alternate work and school. So that again is a different type of agreement and different type of contract with the employer than the internship contract.
And how long typically is an internship then in your school?
It really depends, but this one is 3 months. They have 1 month. It depends on the students. As in, I got second year students that have shorter internships, but as you go in your study, the longer the internships become.
Okay.
And your final year study, you're doing part-time studying, part-time working.
So maybe the system.
So obviously,
this is in the UK since I was at school.
This is different from being in a university. In a university, the university doesn't organize any internships for you. You can go and find internships if you want, but the university is completely not responsible for any of that.
See what you.
By the way, the school is not responsible, but it's part of their. I believe it's part of their PR and communications to say we have a network. This is part of the reason why you're paying for us. All that stuff. Now, in reality, I think most of the kids are left to their own devices, but I don't know. I don't want to be like.
So where I went to university, I chose to do a course that's called a sandwich course, and you get and I went to university 25 years ago, so things might have changed, but I think that was the best decision I made. And it was called a thick sandwich course, where I did 2 years at uni, 1 year working, and then my final year. And then you could do a thin sandwich course, which is maybe 1 year. The first year you study, second year you do 6 months at the university, then 6 months working, then 6 months at the university, and 6 months working.
And your 6 months working are supposed to be tied to the kind of stuff you're studying, or not necessarily?
Yeah, it depends. It depends, not necessarily, and it depends. So, and it depends on the course.
It's up to you to find your job, I guess.
Well,
and that's called an internship, or are you going to get to that problem?
Well, I'm kind of going to get to that, because when I was at university, it was kind of both. It wasn't totally up to me. So the university, yes, they had contacts, and the university I went to, the employers were interested in getting the kind of students that came from my university, because they knew they were getting decent students of a certain standard. So they were interested in getting people who had come and work with them for a year. And of course we were cheaper because we're students. And then, but that was, again, very much like you said, I had to write a whole paper about my placement year. I had 2 bits, my reflections of what happened, but also something for the business as well. Now, my course was half business, half psychology. So I could have, if I wanted, have done a year doing something psychology based. And there were other people who did 3-4 year psychology course, straight psychology, 2 years at uni, 1 year working in and around psychology, and then their final year. So we call that a placement year. And for my
and
course,
by the way, it's interesting. I tend to call it an internship. In France, it's called a stage. And it seemed like the most common translation in most, to be understood in most English settings, US, UK, whatever, seems to be internship. Because a placement year that you're describing is quite specific. It's a specific kind of internship. Would you agree? It sounds like it, right? Okay.
It is. I think it is.
Yeah.
There was someone from the university who came to see me in the job I was in, and it was all officially like sorted out.
Yeah.
But the second one you described, where people might be at university and then go and find internships.
Yes, that also
themselves.
Happens. Like,
that's way more common, as becoming way more important now.
Yeah,
way more important now for students, and we're really
it's something that you would do
pushing.
When the end of the year comes around, and you're like, I need an internship for the summer that might make me a little bit of money, but I need for my CV, for my whatever, all that stuff, right? And
it makes you more employable. Now, the other thing that you mentioned was at school having like 2 weeks where you go and maybe you work somewhere, and I don't know if this is still the case, but I had that when I was in final year of high school. Yeah, and we did too. I did too.
There's just like short little bits.
Yeah,
and most of the time people go to their parents, uncles, friends, parents, jobs type thing, because you're just 14.
Yeah, exactly. And we call that work experience. That was what it was called when I was at school.
And here it's probably something like that. I know there's a distinction between those things, but I don't even know. It's still called a stage.
And that is unpaid. That's definitely like the vast majority unpaid. It's just like you're young and you're getting a sense of what it's like to work and all of that.
Yeah, and
so there are these different kinds.
It's not. Yeah, there's different levels. There's the same thing around here. That's what I described. And of course, somebody coming in for a work experience, generally speaking, nobody's expecting them to do employee stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas the young person coming in for a slightly paid internship, or even sometimes unpaid, depending where you are, and I'm sure in the US there are some that are unpaid, even though it depends on the states and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we'll dive into that one, but there's a whole chunk of the conversation, which is it's ludicrous for employers to expect a student to be a full-fledged employee immediately. But that's what happens a lot.
And then I think that
and by fully fledged, I mean they're just like dropping them at the bottom of in the deep end. So there's a lot of merit to being dropped in the deep end, but there's also there's a lot of you could drown. So it's not
that's exactly how I felt on my placement year. I had no idea about how offices worked, how there was office politics and the interactions and picking up the phone and speaking to people. I had no idea. I was so like, I look back and I'm like, oh, it's cringy. It's like, what was I
nobody
like?
does. Nobody knows.
Yeah.
And but
and it's okay to feel like that. It's okay to feel like you don't know.
Totally. This is, I guess we're just veering, not really answering the question, but it's okay. We'll get back to it. Because that's what I was talking about. And I mentioned to you that I had a couple of students contact me because they had issues with they had bad experiences with their internships.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff that you're told or read, or maybe you're never told that, but you just expect it because your whole life has been at school and there's been somebody telling you how things work one way or another. You could say, your parents, most of the time, right? For the vast majority of people, and there's a great episode of Philosophize This that talks about exactly that thing about being a kid, where, I mean, unless you've had a really, really bad experience as a child, for a lot of people, when you're a child, you're like, well, if you have a problem, you have this amazing solution you call mom or dad. Because you don't know what's going on. And now, and then, there's a whole other perspective that during your school years, your teacher tells you what to do. Mm-hmm. Now you could say there's better teachers, not as good teachers, but generally speaking, they're going to show you the way.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go to a school, there's a placement year, you're going to be told, okay, we're going to be integrating you slowly into the workplace so you have an experience of how things are. And then basically you just dumped into it, and you realize that nobody's got time for you.
Yep.
Nobody's got time for you. I mean, unless, and this is the changes vastly, unless you're just lucky and somebody is taking you under their wing, or there's a structure in the company where you're working that makes it easy. But it's really a roll of the dice. Not only a roll of the dice, because this brings us back to our question about interviews. We did have a conversation about
I was going to say that we did.
I just had a deja vu. I was like, I'm about to say things that they've already said on this show.
Yeah, we were last week. We talked about, is there a personality type to work in communications? We did
another one about interviews.
We did talk about an interview is as much about finding out about the company as them finding out about you. But I don't know if we had a specific question about interviews. I think it came up in the conversation. Is there a personality type to have to work in communications?
That's not what I was thinking about. That doesn't matter.
Okay.
I just had a sudden, like, I've said this stuff before, but maybe I didn't say it with you. But now I forgot what I was about to say. Anyway, I'll come back in a second because I'm still onto it.
Nobody has time for you. If you're lucky, you'll have someone who takes care of you.
Some of the questions that you could. So there's the only thing that's not completely left to luck is you can maybe get a sense of things in interviews and the way that you ask your questions.
Which goes back to the question we're asking.
What we were saying last week, and it does go back to the question that we're talking about.
How do you prepare for an internship interview?
I do want to caveat a few things about the in the US part. I'm like, so one, while I still do interviews, and probably I've generally probably have a lot of experience myself doing interviews. I was just going to say I'm old and I don't do interviews that much, but it's not true, because one, I've changed jobs a lot more than other people, and I'm an independent, so I'm always doing interviews in a way.
And you worked in recruitment as well.
And I've worked in
give
recruitment.
You another perspective.
It's a while back, and it was in the UK. It's a bit more difficult for me to have a perspective. So this is where it's difficult. So a lot of literature and a lot of people are going to be prone to making generalizations based on a culture, based on a country, based on this is the right way to do things.
Good point.
Which is worth paying attention to. I'm not saying it's not. I might not be aware of those, so you should do a bit of Google research or whatever, or DuckDuckGo if you want to go private. I use DuckDuckGo, but so it's worth looking at that. But any of that is always to be taken with a pinch of salt, because it's just vast generalization. Even saying, like, how do I prepare in the US rather than as opposed to the UK, for example, is a vast generalization. The US is a continent-wide country. It has different cultures in every office, in every person, in every coast, in every city. So you can identify a few things. And I know that France, for example, tends to be very different. But it also, there's a whole very conservative way of interviewing and that exists. But there's also another way more open, global, half talking in English, not using the polite form of speech.
Oh, okay.
In French, because that's
a French
thing. Trend of interviewing, which tends to be a little bit more like the globalized world, like we're all cool and we're all at the same level, which is both great on one hand and also very deceptive on another, because so the whole idea of flat hierarchy and all that is just, I mean, to me, some people are going to disagree, but it's not true. There's obviously a hierarchy.
Yeah.
And if you're coming in as an intern and you're being sold on the idea that we're all at the same level and you believe it, that's because you're naive and you're young. I'm sorry, I'm going to be the cynic and I'm going to be the old guy, but so while it's true, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't like treat all the other people with respect.
That was a really big thing for me, realizing how much that I don't mean being nice. I do mean respectful. It makes I discovered firsthand on my placement year how much treating people with respect makes a difference.
Yeah, which is a good thing to learn. And by the way, treat everybody with respect anyway.
Yeah, I was shocked.
Even if they
at the difference
don't
it
treat
made.
you with respect.
Yes, totally agree.
Which
I was
will
shocked
happen.
at,
Or
and
you will feel so, even when it's not on their minds at all. That's just how they do things. And most of the time, there's a lot of that going on. And it's got nothing to do with, you might feel as a young person that they're not treating you with respect, which on one hand may be true. On another, it's just like it's just, so, I mean, I'm going to make a horrible analogy. If I swat a fly aside, this fly might feel like I'm not treating it with respect, but I have no consciousness of how the fly feels. I don't really care. It's not my, it's just completely out of my, what I'm worrying about.
Yep.
So you might come across somebody in an office, and say, if you work in a large office, you go into a meeting, you're like, oh, this person didn't treat me with respect. And that this person has way more things to worry about than you. And it's not, and yes, they probably didn't. So sure. And I'm, by the way, I'm talking to up to a certain point. There's a whole other point if they're actually really being nasty directly to you, harassment, kind of, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about being dismissive or just not really worrying about you, and or having no idea how you're feeling because they got all sorts of other things to worry about.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you're not worth of being concerned with.
Yep.
I'm just saying they're just doing their thing. They're used to operating however they're used to operating. You're not. You're the one coming into it. And for the vast majority of employees, employers, people, they completely forgot and are not thinking about how it is to show up the first time for a completely new job.
Yeah.
And again, this circles back to, if you're lucky, somebody will.
You want to be.
And I'm not saying, I don't want it. I don't know how frequently it doesn't happen, but I'd rather overstep and over-index on, like, listen, just it's the deep end. You're going to be thrown into it so that you're ready, rather than be completely floored, because this is what's happening to my students when they're like, well, I was told that people are going to look after me and nobody's looking after me. And I'm sorry, you're not the most important person most of the time. And it really depends what type of organization you're joining, who's going to be there. And this circles back to what I was talking about preparing interview questions and trying to get a sense, which is super difficult in one interview, to be fair, because a lot of people will be prone to, let's say, misrepresenting or having literally no idea what goes on. So are you meeting the person who's going to manage you? Can you get any kind of sense of whether they're going to take some time for you or be there for you? Or if they're not there for you, whether there's a team so you can call on to other people, which is that part. Those two parts are increasingly, well, not increasingly, just like exponentially more difficult and rough the past year. Because all the students I'm talking about, a lot of them have had to work remotely. And if you're working remotely with somebody who doesn't have time, and you're not there, you have no idea how this thing operates, you're really like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do in front of my computer. I have no idea.
This is true.
Even less so than being, but you could do the same thing in an office. You like less than an office, you've been to a meeting, and you're like, I don't know what's expected of me.
Yeah. That's what I was going to just mention, the knowing what's expected of you and what you're required to do, or where your role is. That was something that I was shocked that there was nothing really set for me.
So this is perfect, because it's also taking me to my other point. So it's shocking that nothing set for you. What's also going to be shocking is that you might be told, do this, and it makes no sense. You don't know what it means.
Yes. And how, so you don't know how to do it.
Well, there's a few things. One, and I was laughing with this, but this joins back some stuff that we talked about in the past, but I'm going wide sweeping for this whole conversation. I'm sorry. It just, maybe some people are going to be reactive, or particularly on the employer side of things, but this is a little bit more for the students, which is, and it's true where it's true. It's not true where it's not true, but I'd rather, as I said, anyway, most people, and just human beings in general, are extremely bad at expressing what they want and explaining what they need and how they want it done.
Mm-hmm.
We're really, really, really bad
Mm-hmm.
at that. We're bad at
Mm-hmm.
knowing what we want.
Mm-hmm.
We are, and I say just it happens across industries. I've seen it at all sorts of places of work and places of
Mm-hmm.
office, unless you're working in somewhere that's been standardized to an extent where all the thinking about this stuff has been done in advance by other
Mm-hmm.
people.
Mm-hmm.
But those jobs tend to be very, very low paid jobs because all the thinking's been done, the standardization's been done. If you go flip burgers at McDonald's, there's like tons of thinking that's been done on exactly like you have this much space. You don't have any space. You are a cog in a machine and you have all the instructions needed to tell you how the cog should be operating. So from the way that you're greeting customers to the way that you're flipping your burgers to the amount of squirts of mustard that you're doing, all of that has been to the T explained to you. So, but when you go in most office environments or a lot of other kinds of work where there's going to be a little bit more freedom of movement to get things done, or at least seemingly, you usually don't have that. And a lot of businesses seem to have practices and operations, but that are just not really organized. Now, it's not true everywhere. Some are very organized, but maybe not necessarily organized in a way to disseminate the information. And in those cases, a lot of people operate by, well, I'll know it when I see it. I'll know you've done a good job when I see it. Go write that report. And you're like, okay, I have never done this before. What am I supposed to do? And which leads us to another point, which is, so however you learn how to get things done, and so you have to help most of the time your managers, you, the intern, has to learn and help your managers to get them to work out what it is they want, ask them the right questions.
Yes.
And most of the time, unfortunately, now, if you're super lucky, again, I keep talking about luck, there might be other factors, but they'll really explain very, very well what they're expecting of you. And of course it happens. But otherwise you won't. And then there's a whole other point, which is, this ties back to this, the development growth of being a student, living in a very organized environment where people tell you what to do and there's a certain amount of expectations. All of the adult world is freeform and everybody's making it up as they go.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. The only reason the person they're working with who's older than you and has been there for a long time seems to know anything is because they've been doing it over and over again, but really they're just making it up. And if you ask them questions that might be disturbing, like, well, I don't understand how to fill the report, they're like, whoa, okay. And they might realize themselves, and people might not like this, that they don't know how to fill the report either. They know how to fill it, but they don't know how to explain how to fill it.
Yeah. I've had similar. I've had that speaks to everything you're saying. Speaks to a lot of what happened to me on my placement year.
And I'm completely going into what I wanted to talk about, and we will get back to the questions because this is not specific to interviewing. But I think
it all relates to the question, the world of internships and preparing, and the once you. So there's a couple of things that I want to ask you actually. So you mentioned the preparing and the interview, but I think everything you're saying about asking questions and clarifying expectations is also brilliant practice, a brilliant thing to be able to do when you're in the internships. When I was I didn't realize I was
sorry, go ahead.
I didn't realize I was doing this when I was on my placement year, but I was like a sponge. I was like listening and learning and questioning, and I didn't realize that's what I was doing. But one of the things that changed everything for me was a mentor who they kind of took me under their wing, but in the space of and he only stayed there like maybe 3 or 4 months. The amount I learned in that short space of time from him and his guidance was unreal, unbelievable. And it completely shifted everything for me. Like he would I would write a document. I remember I wrote a report we were doing a situation analysis for a client, and I had a bunch of research. I put it all together and he gave it back to me with red pen all over it. It was like, what's going on? And up until that point, I'd been writing stuff, but no one had given me any decent feedback. So he gave back to me with loads of red pen on it. And that happened once. And after that, my sense of how I write things, it influenced how I write today, how I write my emails today. And how I write today is massively influenced. How I write at work today is massively influenced by what happened in that 3 or 4 months. So I think that when you find a good mentor or somebody who, even if they're not talking or dealing directly with you, someone who the stuff they're saying lands with you, listen, like just 100% hang on everything. Don't necessarily look like you're hanging everything, but hang on what they're saying and integrate it and use it and play with it and try it out.
Yeah.
That's
where I was going to get to. That's the most important thing.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I was going to get to
find great mentors.
So it's a tough one. Find great mentors, because
it is.
You rarely know in like a 40-minute interview.
Yes.
The company's going to be like, what this person's going to be like. Now, everybody represents themselves on their best. Nobody's going to tell you, yeah, the company's a bit of a mess in the background, just don't worry about it. Nobody's going to tell you that. They're going to talk about whatever, go figure. So, but that mentor, and they are around.
Yes, they are.
They are around. There are great people around. You have to ask. You have to. So that's the other thing. So asking questions in the interview, whether it's in the US, in the UK, in France, or wherever, it doesn't matter, which is intimidating, because you are looking for a job, and you're looking for, and the more you're interested in this company for whatever reason, or the more, or the closer you are to the date where you're supposed to start an internship and you don't have a job yet, the more eager you're going to be, the more stressed out you're going to be, the more worried you are. You probably have other things to do, like delivering papers and exams and stuff like that. So there's a lot of work on, or just, it's one of the really uncomfortable situations in life. I remember reading this article that I think I talked about this idea before, but there are really three, and I've talked about it last week even, I think, the three areas where you're feeling a bit naked and at risk to while you're opening yourself up for rejection that kind of hurts and feels bad, which is just in romantic situations. And so the three, as a grown-up, because you're getting into that territory, and when you're students and you're going to the workplace, on quote unquote grown-up adult, right? Okay. You're living life on your own. So which is when in romantic situations, you might be rejected by somebody you like, etc., or it's all that. Just you're opening your heart. You might be rejected. Where you're looking for a place to live, because that's safety. That's core safety. That's the roof over your head. You find, and apartment hunting in most big cities where a lot of people live, or even small villages. My brother and sister live in a small village. It's like super difficult to find a place to live. Half the places to live are taken over by holiday makers who are there 1 week a year. Anyway, it's just it's a difficult market. So finding somewhere you like to live and not being rejected, because when you go look for a place to rent, you might be rejected, and it's going to be the place you really like. And it's just, that's core safety. That's really, really rough. And work is the other one. So going in for an interview is, you're feeling inferior, you're feeling like you're in need, you're feeling hopeful because it's something that really matters to your career, particularly when you're young in your career. And if it's a company you're really interested in, I mean, there's tons of feelings that go into this that make it really difficult. So you're eager to please and show yourself on your best. Now, it's worth remembering, and it's easier said than done. I'm sure you've heard this 10,000 times, that, as we said last time, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, which sounds great, but except that when you're in the middle of that room or on that video call with somebody, well, it doesn't feel that way.
That's why the preparation is important. Doing the thinking in advance is really
And if essential. You have the list of questions, you will be, and even if you feel intimidated about asking those questions about the business, and even if you don't find out everything, one, it's good practice. You'll come across as a better candidate.
Yeah, it differentiates yourself straight away if you have a list of questions and you've done some thinking.
And the questions you want to have may well be revolving around, and you might as well say for an internship, like, I do not have any experience in this. I'm super eager, I'm super motivated, but I need somebody to take me over the ring. Is that going to be you? How am I going to be managed? How do you usually manage interns? Those are great questions.
Yeah. And
now the person might represent things or lie. Completely happens as well. Well, they might not think they're lying, but if they tell you all sorts of things about how they manage interns, great. And then you find yourself in a pen with like 8 other interns, and the person who hired you never to be seen again, which happens. You're like, oh, well, okay. Well,
you just reminded me, like, something that, so this is the other thing that I think made my placement year slightly complicated is that all the students are meant to start at the same time, but I had a holiday booked with my sister. It was the first holiday we went on together by ourselves.
Mhm.
And because I had that holiday booked, I had a different start date to the other students. So when I turned up on my first day and it was the induction and the welcome day and the starter day, I was joining with these super duper experienced marketing people. So there was like 4 other people. And I sat there and I was like, all the time I'm thinking I'm so out of my depth. I have no idea what's going on. So I just sat there and didn't say anything really, just listened or pretended to listen.
Sure.
And it was really challenging, really challenging. I kept thinking, I wish I'd started earlier. I wish I'd been there with other students because it would have been easier and all of that. But looking back, it was a formative experience. You discover more about yourself that way. I think that's the other point I want to make. You discover more about yourself in these situations than you realize.
Yeah.
And
usually what's wanted by the employers is for you to be autonomous, because they don't.
Yes.
Nobody wants to manage anybody.
Yes.
And you're no longer at school. They're not your parents. They're not your teachers.
Yeah.
So the question for yourself is like, okay, this is what I'm dealt with. This is what the cards have been dealt.
Yeah.
This is the situation I'm in, whatever that might be. Whether you have a lot of framing, like, you've been given a wide berth of stuff to do or how to do them. Anyway, look at, all right, how am I going to make life easier for the person who hired me? If they have not explained to you how to do things, then it's not like, oh, well, they haven't explained to me how to do things. Okay, great. Well, you moan about it for 2 minutes, but then, okay, now, how am I going to get them to tell me how to do what I need done? Can I look online for examples of things that I need to get done? Can I ask them, like, listen, I don't know how to get this thing done. Can you give me an example of something that you've liked before?
And then I'll do the rest. Yeah.
Etc. Like, so so put the onus back on you to be independent and autonomous, because that's what people want. And I usually also like to say that the great saying, which I love, which might get you in trouble, but at least you'll learn, is it's easier to ask forgiveness than to ask for permission.
Yeah. Yep.
Meaning, like, take initiatives, do things.
Yep.
Even if you're out of your depth. And particularly nowadays that we have the internet, where like basically just about anything and everything is taught in a tutorial on YouTube or whatever. So there's a high level of chance that there's some kind of clue somewhere. Even just this video is another one. Even though you're probably not going to watch the whole hour, but anyway,
don't say that.
No, but you know, when you want to learn something, I look at YouTube and Google, and if there's a 1 hour answer, I'm like, okay, I'll just keep that one for later. I want the 2-minute answer first, or 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe 15, but hour-long things, I'm like, yes, when I have time. I mean, it depends. If I'm left to my own devices completely and I have no idea, then it might be worth investing the whole hour into this.
There's everything we're saying is reminding me of something, and I'd be interested to get your take on it. It's reminding me of The Office, the TV program.
Yeah, I've never watched the whole of it, but I get the whole. I've watched enough episodes of the US and the UK.
So I watched the UK version of The Office. I watched the
whole of the UK. I think I've not.
Yeah, it's not very much. There's only there's not many seasons, and seasons in the UK programs tend to be smaller. So I watched the UK one. I've watched some of the US one.
A little bit, not much. I mean, it's crazy because a lot of people are like, "Oh my god, I watched it 3 times."
So that program does a good job of highlighting some of the madness that happens in an office job.
Yeah.
And what's interesting for me is that the pupils I teach, some of them have watched that program and love it, not knowing how close to reality some of the situations really are.
And they might be surprised when they get into it. They're like, wait a minute, this is actually from The Office. You're like, well, yeah, what do you think they got the inspiration from? And I think we're talking about office jobs a lot because it seems like a lot of our students are talking about this. And it's not true for all non-office jobs, but there's a lot of non-office jobs where there's a lot more framework around what you're doing. whether for safety reasons or like we used the fast food example earlier, but let's say you're working in construction. There's a lot of health and safety measures that make it that you're not going to be gone to your own devices to go climb on top of a building like that. You just, somebody's going to watch over you, I think, a little bit more. Whereas the office,
no, it is because one of our, so at our school we had a bunch of ex-pupils or contacts from the school come and do a video presentation. They were interviewed by the students. And they asked them about their jobs. There was a guy who's on doing law internships. There's one guy who works for, he's on a higher apprenticeship, that's what it's called, with Deloitte. There's someone who's training to be an accountant. There was someone who works as a site manager in construction. And that site manager in construction was saying exactly what you're saying. Like, taking care of health and safety, making sure people know what they need to do, when they need to do it. Like, that's a big part of his job because of the dangers inherent in that job. So depending on, we are talking about, yeah, like you said, we're talking about office jobs, but whatever job there is, I think that there are some core fundamentals like ask good questions, listen,
which takes us back to the
be open. And whether you're in an interview with like
and all of those are true of wherever you're going. Like if it's an interview for the US, the UK, France, whatever, it doesn't matter. Now, a little bit more about the US, because I think this is interesting for a lot of people, because a lot of people want to go to the US. I'm not even sure what to tell you. I mean, I know that a lot of the concern, if you're coming from abroad,
so when you worked in the US, did you do any interviews?
So there's a big thing first, before we even get to anything cultural, there's a big thing about legal.
Okay.
Are you authorized to work in the US?
Oh, okay. Right. Okay. Yeah.
And in what conditions are you authorized to work in the US? That's a big barrier for a lot of people who are looking from other countries. Now, it's possible. There's a lot of immigrants with high skills that make it that they have visas. I don't know about internships. I really don't know how that works.
Do you have an American passport?
I do. That's why I can work easily.
Yeah. Okay.
I do. So I don't have those questions.
Yeah.
I just thought it's worth mentioning for anybody hopeful. If you do not have an American passport, it's complicated.
Yeah.
And the kind of office jobs we're talking about are managed by, the HR and legal departments and all sorts of stuff. They're like, oh, well, you don't have a US passport. See you later. They have a lot of US citizens who want jobs too. So they're like, I don't need to talk to somebody like this. Now, do they take a lot of other jobs from other people? There's a lot of other opportunities for, being super stereotypical, but software engineers in the Silicon Valley for people coming from India. I don't know, making this up, but yes,
what about?
They're typically not. There's a whole other thing, which is, and this is, I'm talking out of I don't really know. There's a lot of people looking for internships who have been studying in the US. So they've paid top dollar to be in US universities and who have visas that allow them to work to a certain extent or to go to internships with the hope of transforming that into a full-fledged visa sponsored job, etc. Which happens, by the way, that happens in the UK, in the US, in France. There's people in France who have the same kind of thing going on, who are studying at the school where I'm teaching, and they come from different countries, and they're like, well, I have which is an added stress on looking for interviews and internships, because they're like, what's at stake for me is not just whether I get the ideal company. What's at stake for me is being able to stay here.
Yeah.
The big thing at stake when you go to an interview. And there's tons to be stressed about. I'm just appreciating that it's difficult.
What about being multilingual? Does that make a difference in the US?
It depends. So it's difficult to say. So between the UK, so I don't know.
Because
the interviews I've had in the UK and the US tend to be very conversational.
Yeah.
And there's a whole Anglo-Saxon way of working, of doing interviews that is to a certain extent in French, but is not the old school French. And the old school French is very much, I've seen, and I've even had interviews like this not long ago, like a year ago, that are really just grilling you to find fault in who you are, which is really weird.
Oh, wow.
And just, they tend to be quite aggressive, which I really dislike. Whereas in the UK and the US, you might find somebody who's like this, of course, but it tends to be more conversational, trying to put you, the interviewee, at ease.
Mm.
It doesn't mean you're not going to be asked difficult questions.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't, but certainly, so certainly you might be, the person interviewing you might go into detail into who you are and what knowledge you have and what opinions you have about your field of studying or life in general. But you're also, if we're talking about internships, you're students, so they are aware that you don't really have much experience. They're going to try to gauge, maybe, but the US and the UK, I think, is the same. They're going to try to gauge whether you're interesting, whether you have passions, whether you're going to be self-organized, whether you're going to be able to manage if they throw you in the deep end, because they might know that's what's going to happen.
Those kind of interviews,
I have a difficult time answering something specific about the US.
But those kind of interviews that you're talking about, the conversational interviews, are they? It sounds to me like they tend to be for smaller companies. Is that true?
No,
because when I was applying,
I don't feel like I have enough knowledge about this. Like I would have to.
Because definitely when I was applying for both the placement year type jobs as part of my degree, but also after graduation, the bigger companies I was applying for, it was a very kind of intensive application process. Like you had a load of students for a big blue chip company, and you were all there, and you had a group interview, and you had a group task, and you had a single person interview.
Yeah, because that's those, they have internship presentation, and they're only taking a certain amount.
Yeah, a whole assessment, a whole day of assessment.
Yeah, that happens too. Yeah, sure.
And that was, and not only, but I mean, that typically happens for graduate jobs, but this was happening for the placement year jobs before, this was like low paid
before you even
internship.
Talk with anybody, so it's not even an interview.
Well, I had both.
Okay.
Yeah, I had both. I had, as part of the assessment.
Well, then I'm not qualified to answer the question. I don't know.
As part of the, and bear in mind, this is like 25 years ago, but I know
now how much have things changed. I don't know.
Well, I do know now that there are ex-pupils that I have taught who have been through the same process that I went through over 20 years ago. The same, there's loads of people there. There's a group task, you're observed, they give you feedback, then they put you to a one-to-one interview. Then you have to prepare some kind of presentation, you evaluate all of that.
But those are from very big companies, so they usually have the similar type of process, whether you're in New York or in London, right?
Yes, those are big companies. And
so is it different because it's in the US? I'm not sure.
I don't necessarily think it is different. I think it's, but you make a good point about the maybe English speaking, I don't know, like the Anglo-Saxon countries, or I don't know, but there are certain similarities. I think it might be the division might be big companies, very standardized, loads of people, they'll just take the best, and smaller companies that maybe want someone to come and do something for be an intern for a certain amount of time or whatever. I don't know.
You also never know what's going to make the edge or the difference. For students, it tends to be a lot of personal stuff.
Mm.
So above and beyond your academic qualifications, you're studying, whether they get a sense of you being able to be autonomous, your passions and personal interests and the way that you talk about them are really an asset. So not to be forgotten.
You told that martial arts story last week.
Exactly. And actually, it's funny because reaching back to last week, this is where the possibly, depending again who's interviewing you, what job you're going for, and this could be very wildly, maybe the extrovert personalities have an edge there. I don't know. But it depends, because there's a lot of people who consider themselves to be introverts who are really great on one-on-one conversations, and most interviews are one-on-one conversations. So I have a really hard time saying like this is specific about the US. I'm not American enough. I've not been to enough interviews in enough of the country. I think the big and small company distinction you just made is really useful. I think preparing yourself with questions, and not just, and I don't mean like congratulatory questions about the business that you don't know. I mean, really questions about like the day-to-day of what you're going to be doing.
Yeah, really good. That's
your
really
team, your manager, and those are all as many hints of trying to find out, do I have a mentor in this place?
Mm.
And this is also a point that we didn't make yet that I wanted to make, is that in the vast majority of cases, you don't have, your choice is mainly going to be, do I take this offer or not? There's only few people that have multiple offers.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, did it happen to you very often to say, well, I have these 3 job offers, which one do I want? Because we kind of tend to talk about interviews and job hunting like we suddenly have 3 different job opportunities, which might happen that you have 2, rarely 3, but those are rare. Most of the time you have a job opportunity, you're like, do I take it or not? And depending on how close you are to the date you need an internship or whatever other situation that makes it you have a date, you're like, this is an opportunity. Do I take it? Most of the time you're going to say yes. And the world's going to say to you, you should take the opportunity you got. I would tell you, don't settle, which is very difficult. But do consider every opportunity to its full, like really, 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 really. And again, that goes back to the value of some of the stuff that we talked about before, which is looking to what you want.
When I got my placement.
And when you, by the way, and when you're a student, this is your first internships, it's wide open to learn anything and everything.
Yes.
So you have less reason, in my opinion, to say no, unless you have a very, very, very firm opinion about what you want to be doing. But even if you have a very firm opinion about what you want to be doing, you're probably half deluded because you don't really know how it is. We're always half deluded, by the way. This is not a personal assessment. I think human beings are generally deluded in life because we have a high opinion about all sorts of stuff that is half fantasy in our heads. That come from how we grew up, what we heard from our parents, and watching The Office, all of those things, right?
That's
so
a really
you have
great
less
point.
reason to say no when you have an opportunity. But it's also true that a lot of people will tell you, take the first opportunity that comes. And I would disagree with a lot of people because that's a view of things as scarce. It's a view of scarcity. It's a view of like, well, there's no other opportunities, but you do.
In English,
you have
we
a choice.
we actually say scarce.
Scarcity.
Yeah.
Scarce. Sorry. Scarcity. Yeah.
Scarce versus abundant.
There are other opportunities out there. And if you don't feel this is right, and radar to say like, I don't feel this is right. Did you get a single inkling that, so one, you have a really bad juju vibe about the person that you met? And this probably is a smaller company thing, but is it worth listening to your intuition? Our intuition is not always right. So I don't know. I can't tell you in advance. Did I get information or did I get zero information, or did I feel that the person was like completely changing the topic when I said, well, are the internship, are the interns managed and who manages them? How many other jobs do they have? Because if the person managing, this is a small company thing. If the person managing the interns is like one of 2 people in the company and they have every single hat possible, you're like, yeah, you're probably not going to have time for me. Up to you how autonomous you feel. There's a lot of advantages in being in a small structure because you get to do a lot of stuff, which I really like. There's a lot of advantages to being in a large structure because it's very structured, obviously. And there's large teams, so you can call on people and ask other people if you don't understand what's going on. You're probably only going to get one opportunity at a time anyway. So there is a choice for you. It's not like I have no choice. You have a choice. You have a choice to say yes or a choice to say no.
Really good points. Really, really good points. When I was looking for my placement, I found my placement really, really late in the year. So that thing about a date and having a deadline, there were loads of my contemporaries who were already placed. Yeah. And then there was me waiting around and thinking, okay, what am I going to do? So I did take the first one that I got.
Yeah.
And then as it transpired, they needed someone quickly who just could come in and do stuff.
Yeah. And the person you spent 3 months was an awesome mentor. Did you have any inkling that would happen?
No, I didn't.
So this is also
I made the most of everything that I did.
This is another thing that we've said before, and I want to underline again. You have a lot of people, as a young person, you have a lot of people who tell you they know, and this is how things are, and they have no idea. We have no idea. At best, I want to be as informative and giving as much useful advice as possible in these conversations that we have every week and that we have fun with. But really, people have no idea. Anybody who comes to you, oh, this is one thing I keep telling my students. Anybody who comes to you, and I'm sure I've said this before on the show, anybody who comes to you with saying, like, with any attitude or knowledge and say, this is how things are, this is how you should
I know how it is.
Just take the, just like, do not believe them. They are full of it. They have no idea. Now, don't call them on it. That's not going to be in your advantage. But maybe they're right. But take it with a pinch of salt and question everything they're saying. Go and double check it. Find out with other people. Not to be a mean, disbelieving, sour cynic. Not for that. But because it's better to be ready for something bad and to say, let's question this a little bit and find out more. And you know what? You can, and I talked to another one of my students who was having a hard time finding an internship and had a few other opportunities that didn't work out and was disappointed, and then had an opportunity with a company who has a very bad reputation.
Right.
Extremely bad reputation with like bad press, etc.
Wow.
So they were like, well, do I take it or not? But that's the only opportunity I got. I'll take it. It's also it's a company, it's a big company.
It's also some of the most powerful learning you should get.
Exactly.
You should go into it that way.
And whatever happens to you, it's all good learning. That's how you should be taking your experience for an internship. Good or bad, there's all learning. And bad is often a function of not expecting things to go this way. And or you have certain things that you're not communicating to your employer. Because we are in school, not technically and typically at all trained to communicate very well. What does that mean? That means, well, you listen for a bunch, then you just prepare questions and ask questions. You might not get the answers, but we often don't formulate our questions, believe we said what we wanted, and then are disappointed by it when we don't get the right answers. Now, all of this is much easier said than done. Much easier said than done. But at least if you have an inkling out of like, okay, well, and there's, it's better to risk. Well, I don't know what's better, but to risk being annoying and ask another question if you don't understand the answer. Reformulate your question. If you're like, I don't understand how to write that report. I'm sorry, sir, I don't understand, or sir, or however you call them, Joe. Joe, your manager. I'm sorry, I don't know how to fill the report you asked me to. Can you give me an example? So in your formulation of the question, this goes back to what we were saying, how can you make the job of answering easier for the person you're talking to?
Yeah.
That is something you have control over.
Yep.
So for example, can you show me an example of this report or 3? Just send them over by email, and that way I'll have a better idea and it won't take you long, hopefully. Yeah. No, I don't have any other examples. Oh, okay. Let me have a search online. I'll get back to you at the end of the day with some examples. So just try to think about alternatives.
Yeah.
Because try some way or another to not lay the onus on the other person, but still do ask. I don't know how else to say that.
I think what you said, there's a couple of things that are really good and quite a good place to end. I think everything is learning, approaching everything as learning and growing as an opportunity for your own development is a mindset that I think that can really make a difference. And then also making it easy for people to give you an answer, reformulating the question. I think that's pretty powerful, really powerful. Where can I find an example, or like, how can I make this better, or whatever it is? Putting the onus on yourself, a willingness to be responsible for your own experience.
Another one is, and these are tips, but you got to think about more yourself. Can you give me the details of a previous intern you worked with and really liked, and I can contact them if you don't have time.
Very, very powerful.
There's tons.
Very cool.
Just to think about it. Cool. Great way to end. Thank you.